What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another modern video, and today we're going to be taking a look at a deck that I think has a very small percentage of the modern metagame, not because it's necessarily a bad deck, but more so like the complexity behind it and the really high like skill ceiling that this deck seems to have. When really looking at it at first glance, it doesn't really seem like it or that it'd be easy. But without further ado, today we're going to take a look at Simic Hardened scales. For the modern format, this list in particular is piloted by is149950, who took it to a 5-2 finish in the Swiss, made the top 8, and took down the challenge with said deck. Of course, before we get too deep into it, I would appreciate it if you have not already subscribed to the channel, that you do subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when I post videos. I also live stream on Twitch. If you want to go follow the link in the description down in the video to my Twitch channel, throw me a follow over there. I also will be uploading like the streams and stuff like that to the main channel as well. There's also a link to the Discord server in the description of the video to go ahead and follow that. Feel free to join, all that fun, happy stuff. So, taking a look at Simic Hardened scales, obviously the deck is not necessarily centered around, but like the main piece is the card Hardened scales, which basically says if one or more +1/+1 counters be put on a creature you control, you put that many +1. So if a creature would get one +1/+1 counter, it gets 2. If it gets 2, or if it would get 2, then it gets 3, so on. So we are abusing those kinds of synergies with cards like the Ozolith and Ozolith Shattered Spire, which is a new addition from March of the Machines. So the Ozolith says that whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, you put those counters on the Ozolith. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you can move all those counters onto a target creature. So you have cards like Patchwork Automaton that care about you casting artifact spells and getting +1/+1 counters on it, which again, like in conjunction with like Hardened Scales and Ozolith the Shattered Spire, which kind of works like a Hardened Scales that could just also happens to cycle and can put +1/+1 counters on artifacts or creatures. Since it can target an artifact, it can actually just put +1/+1 counters on the Ozolith, which then like can then go on to other creatures and things like that. So that's a pretty neat synergy. But like you have cards like Patchwork Automaton, they'll get +1/+1 counters from casting artifact spells, of which there is at least half of your deck is artifact spells. You have Arcbound Ravager, which is probably the most famous artifact creature in Modern. I would say if you played within like the last few years, or at least from the back of the inception of Modern to the last few years, where you can sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then modular 1 means that it comes into play with a +1/+1 counter, and when it dies, whatever counters were on it, you can move to another target artifact creature. So with Arcbound Ravager, uh, you can get some crazy synergies with Ozolith, which we'll get to here in a second. You have Zabaz, which also has modular 1, so it comes into play with a +1/+1 counter. If a modular triggered ability will put one or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, puts that many +1 on it instead. So essentially, when like the Zabaz, like if you legend rule your own Zabaz, you can put 2 counters on it just without any other modifiers. Arcbound Ravager modulars, the same thing. Like when it dies, you can put however many counters +1 that it had on it, which is really kind of neat. You have Walking Ballista and Hangerback Walker, two double X artifacts that do two different things, but are both very beneficial to like the game plan that you have for the deck. Where like Walking Ballista, if you just get a ton of counters, just +1/+1 counters in play, swapping them back and forth, whatever. Like, it is very likely that with a Hardened Scales, an Ozolith, and a Arcbound Ravager, and I guess even like a Zabaz, like you could throw in the mix, it is very easy to just make a Walking Ballista that can deal 20 damage to your opponent. Same with a Hangback Walker that could just get a ton of counters on it, sacrifice, make a ton of Thopters that could like even make your Arcbound Ravager even crazier to then set up like a Walking Ballista or even like bigger Hangerback Walkers down the line. This is where like I'm talking about this deck has some like crazy synergies and has like a super high like skill ceiling because that there is a ton of these interactions and stuff in the deck. So You kind of have ancient strings to tie everything together. You can find a slew of like creatures, your artifacts. Obviously, you can't get the hardened scales. Even like the ozolith, you can't get because it is technically a color, and ancient string says you have to find a colorless card. But you have all these lands and stuff like that. Like you're not short of hits with ancient stirrings. On top of that, like all of your important cards, like minus Shattered Spire, are colorless. So that's pretty good for you. So to break down and I guess kind of fill some time for this because like the mana base, I mean, is just kind of is what it is. You are playing kind of like it's called Simic, but really you just play like 3 over in the sideboard for the creativity matchups and stuff. But like you have these different like card like you have Crack Crown Pathways and Grove of the Burnwillows, so you can activate the destroy target artifact you control on Zabaz, which has some interesting things that you can do with like Hangerback Walker, like destroying like your own Hangerback Walker and then destroying your own Zabaz, so you can put counters on your Hangerback Walker and then blow it up. Whereas like if you Zabaz to like blow itself up and put counters on it, you obviously don't have it in play. So things like that you can do is just kind of like blowing up your own thing, holding priority, and then blowing up the Zabaz so you can modular counters onto some of your other things that you want to blow up. You have Horizon Canopy, which could just draw a card later. Inkmoth Nexus is a way that like you can kind of like cheese games out. It has it's a 1/1 flyer with Infect that you can just as easily like kind of kill your opponent with that. A Pendle Haven, which gives you some kind of neat tricks with some of these creatures that are like just 1 power, just 1/1 creatures initially to like give them an additional power and some additional toughness as well to help them survive combat and maybe make some math a little bit trickier. Of course, for Urza Saga to find, your welding jars, your shadow spear, your Ozolith, you can find Zabaz with this, just grabbing some of these other cards that are pretty integral to like the game plan. And of course having some in the sideboard as well for those additional games. So what I mean by like this deck having like a super high like skill ceiling is that you have a lot of like this deck is very much a like you have to know how to do math and being able to do the math very quickly, and even sometimes essentially hoping that your opponent doesn't know how to do it because like if your opponent is like looking at your board and it's just like a hardened scales and an arcbound ravager and they're like, well, I can't die from that. But all of a sudden, like you add an Ozolith to the mix, and you make like a Hangerback Walker that has like one counter on it. Like eventually, like all of a sudden, like you sacrifice a Hangerback Walker, like Arcbound Ravager becomes a 3 power creature because it gets another counter from Hardened Scales. You make a 1/1 Thopter, you sacrifice that. Well, now the Hangerback Walker that had a counter on it is leaving the battlefield, so you're gonna put a +1/+1 counter on Ozolith, and then all of a sudden, you have like this a double-digit power creature from just a Hangerback Walker with a counter, an Arcbound Ravager, and a Hardened Scales. I mean, it's insane. And of course, like any of these other random artifacts, turn to counters. And then eventually, like you just sacrifice the Arcbound Ravager, you put the counters on like an Inkmoth Nexus, and then all of a sudden you still have an Ozolith that has like 10 counters on it as well, where you could make a 21 power flyer, Obviously not super important because it's an infect creature, all you need is 10 damage, but that's just kind of like the things that, can happen. And if you're playing against this deck and you're not aware that that's a thing, you just kind of like play a certain way, say go, and then your opponent just kills you out of nowhere. And that's kind of like the strength of this deck is that it's very hard to do the math, you know, as a person that's playing against it. And even if you're the person playing the deck, like I played this deck for a while, way back when like Modern Horizons 2 like first came out, and there was like a lot, I mean, there's a lot of like optimizing and a lot of skill that goes into being able to do the math, do it relatively quickly as well, and then be able to do it efficiently and optimally to where like you don't get blown out by like removal spells and stuff like that if your opponent's able to interact. And even when your opponent can't interact, it's very hard playing this deck because it is so easy to screw up. And if you missequence something, then you kind of put yourself in an awkward spot, like either trying to rebuild or just trying to cobble together something to where like you put your opponent to a very low life total if not lethal, and then hope that you have enough set up to where maybe if they produce a blocker or something you're still able to get through the last point or two of damage. um, so I mean that's kind of where you'd be at when playing this sort of deck. I really do like the Hardened Scales decks. I think they're very powerful. I just watched a video of like Aspiring Spike playing this in one of the like premier modern challenges, and he did very well. And while this isn't like his list in particular, I believe some of the numbers and stuff different, whatever. It's still really cool that, I mean, this deck is still very powerful. It is very good. It's a deck that I recommend playing if, like, I guess if really math and like sequencing and stuff like that is kind of your thing, because I think this is a really like really good way of just kind of like teaching you some other skills that go deeper than just like playing this deck. And I think the fact of figuring out how important it is sequencing these spells will help you when you play other decks to learn like maybe some different ways of like sequencing certain things to where you might find out that they're better or find out that certain situations that they could be better. So just things to keep in mind. Of course, if you decide to pick up this deck or pick up any other decks and stuff, just being able to look kind of like deeper than the surface. Because while it doesn't look like this deck would be able to produce a lot of power, like there's just some crazy turns where you can just cobble together lethal from like nothing out of nowhere. So that is the Hardened Skills deck for the modern format. No, it's pretty long-winded. Of course, I'm known for like the longer like deck tech videos and stuff like that, but it's all to get the as much information as I can at a base level out for people and try to like convince them to play these decks if they're kind of like on the fence of playing something like this. So of course, that's going to do it for me this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please, again, if you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when I post videos, when live streams and stuff go live, things like that. Go ahead and follow me over on Twitch. The link is in the description of this video, along with the link to the Discord server. Feel free to follow that, join, all that fun stuff. That's going to do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next video.